All right, welcome everybody to another AIESEP Connect, and we really appreciate everybody showing up. And also, if you're listening to this or watching this online, thank you for listening and watching as well. We got a great session today. I'll just start off by giving a plug. We have our AIESEP conference in 2023 in Santiago de Chile. It is July 4th to 7th. You should see that website up live in very early December, if not late November. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. We're here now, November 18th or 19th, Alan, depending on what day of the day you're listening to this. But we're right about to launch that site and the abstracts. So we have a really cool program. We've worked to really change the pricing around for low income countries so we can make it accessible for everybody. There will be a limited online option as well that you're going to be able to stream the keynotes live and have some access to some online presentations if you're not able to make it to Chile. So without further messaging here, let me turn it over to Carla Vidoni, one of our board members, who is going to be running this session.
Thank you, Risto. Hello, everybody. I'm Carla Vidoni. I'm from Brazil originally, and I work at University of Louisville in Kentucky in the US. Today, I have here my colleagues, Alan Ovens, Luiz Sanches, and João Costa. They're going to talk about self-study. I want to read a little bit of a biography of each one of them so you get to know who they are. So Dr. Alan Ovens, he's an associate professor at University of Auckland in New Zealand. His research investigates critical pedagogies for health and physical education, particularly forms of democratic pedagogy, the methodologies for researching social justice and activist teaching, and how digital technologies and critical pedagogy can be enacted in teacher education to promote teachers oriented towards social justice, environmental sustainability, and meaningful physical education. This includes a focus on humanist themes oriented around critical pedagogy and self-study methodology. That's where you're going to talk today, as well as a contemporary focus on postmodern themes oriented around complexity, new materialism, and future-oriented digital pedagogies. My friend, Dr. Luiz Sanches, he's a lecturer at Federal University of Ceará in Brazil. His research agenda includes collaborative teacher education processes between teachers researchers, analysis of collaborative pedagogical practices towards social justice, complexity thinking related to methodological strategies converging to collaborative research with an emphasis on autobiographical narratives, self-study, and action research. And my friend, Dr. João Costa, from Portugal, but lectured at University College of Cork in Ireland. His research interests sustain in the ecological paradigm to link teacher education and teaching quality from the conceptual perspectives of learning communities, communities of practice, collective efficacy, instructional alignment, and promotion of well-being. His projects are strongly pursued from interpretive and community-based participatory research by connecting with a range of academic, professional, and community stakeholders. Thank you very much for being here, and everybody. This has been a very nice audience. Thanks to all my friends and friends of friends for being here. So now I will pass the talk to Alan.
Thank you, Carla, and for that wonderful introduction, and also to Risto. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk a little bit about some research that we've been doing and a methodology that is really meaningful to us. And also thank you to Cassandra for managing the all the questions in the background. And thank you to the audience too, with I know it's a Friday evening for many and maybe an early morning start for some also. So we're here to talk a little bit about self-study, and the aim this morning is to talk through a little bit about the methodology first, and then be able to look at a project that Luiz and João and myself did using self-study. And then we're here to maybe have a discussion or answer any questions that you have about the methodology. So I think a good place to start is to, first of all, just acknowledge that when we talk about self-study, that it is a very broad community. It's one of the really strong things about self-study is that it's a network, and it's a growing network of people that value this particular methodology and really enjoy sort of working together, collaborating, and maybe working as critical friends. Over the last few years, I suppose what's really been interesting is the way the interest in self-study has grown, and we can see that in the growing number of publications on self-study, and not only the number of publications, but also the growing number of journals that are now publishing self-studies. For those that are new to it, it's worth pointing out that we have, there are now two self-study handbooks. The latest one came out, I think was last year. And Tim Fletcher and I have got a chapter in that one about self-study and physical education, teacher education. And we also have our book there. So it's a way into the method if you're interested in it. But there's also a wonderful broad range of books on self-study. So it's not just within our particular physical education community. There's also a number of other publications that you can access if you're interested in this, especially for people who are looking at doing it for the first time, or maybe using it as a basis for your PhD work. It's all there. And then for people who are really, really keen, there is a conference called the Castle Conference that is just specifically focused on the methodology itself. The next Castle Conference is next year in August. And so it's always every second year in Hurstmonceux Castle, which is in the south of England. So it's where the community, the broader community, tend to get together and explore the methodology in a little bit more depth. So when we talk about self-study, what do we mean? Well, the notion of self-study is sort of, as it sort of implies, is something to do with researching yourself. And I suppose one of the issues around self-study is that the word itself, the title, the name self-study, is actually a shortening. It started off as the self-study of teacher education practices, and has evolved to go beyond teacher education to be about teaching practice, I suppose. So we can often talk about the self-study of teaching practice as its more appropriate term. And as something that is initiated by the self, it is a stance that somebody takes. And I've always enjoyed Anthony Clark's quote there, which has always been sort of the orienting feature for me, which is inquiry is the defining feature of professional practice. If you cease to be inquisitive about your practice ceases to be professional. And it captures that idea that as a professional educator, as a teacher, you're always questioning and problematizing your practice and thinking about how you can improve. And so therefore, that second point there, the goal of self-study is to investigate questions of practice that are both individually important to the teacher, but also have a broader interest to the teaching community. So that notion of orienting it towards the self in practice is the important feature there. One of the key questions of self-study is, who is the self in self-study? So we ask, we throw this term around, we're doing a self-study, but what do we mean by the self? And there are a number of different ways of answering that. In the first sense, when we talk about the self, what we're talking about is a political stance that recognizes that the teacher is somebody who can produce knowledge about their practice. So in conventional research, it's often been somebody who's doing research on the teacher, and the teacher tends to be the person who is a passive subject in the piece of research. Self-study turns that around and says, well, the teacher is actually a knowledgeable participant, capable of participating in the research, asking research questions, setting the research agenda. And so in that sense, the self is this recognition that it is the teacher who is looking at their practice and capable of producing knowledge. And from an epistemological point of view, it also recognizes that this person is capable of, through that enacting of practice, being able to reflect on that practice. And they're the ones who are responsible for taking the results of that practice forward in sort of an improvement-oriented way, sort of, what are the results of those questions, and what are the implications for their own practice. And the last point there that we'll just sort of make is that when we talk about the self, we're not always talking about an individual self. We often talk about collaborative self-studies where a number of people are involved in that. So a self can be a broader case of a number of people being involved. So then how do we do a self-study? That's the next step. The key thing about the idea of a self-study of teaching practice is that it's a very broad methodology. And the best way of thinking about self-study is that it has some key characteristics because it overlaps with a number of different things, whether it's autobiographies or if it's narrative inquiry and those sorts of things. So it overlaps. So what makes it a self-study in particular? These are some of the characteristics. Firstly, that self-study tends to be self-initiated and self-focused, meaning that the researcher or the teacher is the person who starts the inquiry, can problematize their practice and set up the research questions that they're going to do and set up the research agenda, and it's focused on their practice. The fundamental reason for doing that is that it's about improvement aimed. So this person is putting their practice under the spotlight with the idea of how do they improve their practice. And it's highly interactive. Now, interactive means that you're thinking about it draws upon a number of different methodology or methods for generating data. And in that, it could be you're interacting with both the data, you're interacting with critical friends, you're interacting with colleagues in the setting, and that you're interacting with the literature. And so it's a matter of trying to choose a method which is going to be generative for your particular research question or the questions that you're asking. So in that sense, it's not just purely an anecdotal process, but it's a process where you're choosing a method which is going to facilitate you answering the questions that are important to your own practice. Importantly, like any good piece of research, and I suppose this statement is about saying that it has rigor, it has the intention there is to be able to let the evidence tell the story. And very often when you're thinking about your own practice, and you may be thinking about your own assumptions or your own beliefs, or your broader question there is, what is the evidence actually saying? And this is why working collaboratively is quite important, especially with a critical friend who can help you interpret that evidence and perhaps bump you out of your ways of thinking, so you can see that your own practice afresh in a new way. And then the last sort of feature of self-study is that it is this, what we talk about is the turn to the self, that ability to reframe your own beliefs about good teaching, that what do these results say about your own practice. Now, those 5 characteristics together broadly define a self-study. And for me, what makes it a little bit different is that sort of my background is through phenomenology, was to always understand what somebody else's experience was like. So I always have to fight that tendency to sort of turn the lens away from myself and to look at how other people are doing things and how other people understand things. So in a self-study, it's that discipline to be able to turn it back on my own practice and to be able to problematize the types of things that are happening in my own practice and bring them to the fore and challenge and question them, which is the hallmarks of self-study. So those are some of the broad sort of features. And I think the best sort of understood if we now sort of turn to looking at a self-study that we did. And at this point, I will hand off to Joe.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you to everyone for being here. I'd just like to echo Alan's beginning thanks to everyone from the organization to the audience. So thank you for joining us. So my name is João Costa. Thank you, Carla, for the lovely introduction that you made. As she said, I'm Portuguese. I'm working in Cork in Ireland. And what I'd like to share with you in two different moments, I'd like to share how I started personally this journey that we're about to share, and Luiz will take you further on that journey, and then I'll come back to tell you how did I end up in terms of my earlier state as I started the journey. So I guess the best thing to start here is just tell you a little bit of how Alan, Luiz, and myself how we came to be together. And this started essentially with a very bold, courageous idea from Carla Lughetti, from Cecilia Borges, and Luisa Gonçalves. Yes. Sorry.
Yes,
so yes, thank you. So the three of them, they addressed a number of people, colleagues from Brazil and colleagues from a range of different international settings, and they invited us all to connect each other in finding common interests, and then groups would be formed and different research projects would stem from those groups, and each group would pursue their own project. So this is basically how Luiz, Alan, and myself, how we joined. We shared a mutual interest in the facilitation process of communities of practice, and that's how we started together, and that's what we're about to share with you. Alan, if you could flip, please. Thank you. So a little bit of how I started this process of self-study. I had some earlier insights. I was aware of self-study. I had read about self-study. I had never done a self-study. I'd never been part of a self-study project. So this is a little bit of how I started. And my earliest memory of self-study was attending a presentation by Missy Parker, where she presented one of her projects of self-study. And the reason why that memory is so vivid and so present in my memory is because it was very emotional. I remember all of the emotions that Missy shared at the session. So obviously that put a very strong seed in my mind in terms of my interest. What is this self-study about? She was also very good at presenting the growing network that Alan also referred at the beginning. So clearly there was already an established network. And so that sparked my interest in learning a little bit more about self-study. So that's a little bit of how my journey in self-study started. I also found myself with a very strong disposition to engage with self-study, as I find this aligned to my practitioner researcher stance. So I think it was kind of easy for me to buy in and to easily engage from an effective domain with self-study. I also felt comfortable with interpretive and socio-constructivist approaches. I'm very much like a mixed methods researcher, but leaning more towards the qualitative side. So I felt that I wasn't starting from scratch, as I knew that the qualitative would be fundamentally essential, vital for the process. Yet I was unfamiliar on how best to engage with this role of critical friend. Not necessarily from a practitioner perspective, because I find that we do that in our, I do that, I'm part of that in my own community, but as a method, as a research method in itself to support systematic and trustworthy data, that was a kind of unfamiliarity that I was dealing with at the beginning. I was also wondering about the differences between the methodological and epistemological differences between self-study and other similar related approaches, such as action research and lesson study. I was aware of some elements, some nuances, but I wasn't fully aware of some of those differences, or the hardcore differences. And I was also, this was more recently from a review that I was doing on a paper on whether the self would be strictly an individual person, an individual teacher, or could it also be a collection of individual selves? So those were my initial insights, dispositions, experiences with self-study, and then I'll come back at the end after Luiz to say a little bit of how I ended up the process as we submitted the paper. So at this point, I'll pass you on to Luiz, who will tell you a little bit more about our journey.
Well, thanks so much, João. Good day or night to everyone. And thank you all for joining us in this session. Well, I first heard of self-study in 2010 in an event, but the first time I really did self-study, and along with Alan and other colleagues, it was 4 years ago in 2018. And this specific piece of research that we did together, the context for it comes from the formation of a group of teacher researchers in 2005. The group was formed by 4 teacher researchers, Tiemi Okimura-Kerr, Carla Ulasovics, and Luciana Venancio, and myself. And although it was not the first time that I investigated this knowledge community, it was in fact the first time that I did investigate it, including myself, making myself visible within the community. So it was quite new to me also, because it was the first time that I noticed myself visible in the research. And the group aimed to research their own practices and undertake a collective inquiry. Can you flip back, Alan? Just yeah. Thank you. Just to explain that we started with the 4 of us, but a few years later, the group grew to 268 members. So it was quite a large group. And over the past 17 years, lots of avenues for professional growth have been created. And in this self-study, we investigated some of those avenues. Please, Alan, flip back now. And regarding the research aim, well, through this specific self-study, our intention was to examine my own experience in the facilitation and cultivation of the knowledge community, and also to better understand how learning communities form, how they are sustained over time, how they create professional knowledge and practices, and how they transform the professional lives of their participants. And I can see that Risto has asked about the 268 members. So I think would be good to explain briefly that they were teachers working both in basic education from kindergarten to high school, and also in higher education institutions. So we can discuss later about more details. But have you heard about that the group is based in Brazil, in different regions of Brazil? So I think we can go onwards.
All right. So if I just jump in here quickly. So we talked about that self-study can draw upon a number of different methods, and it's, in a sense, it's up to the the researchers themselves to be able to choose the methods which are going to suit the research questions, just like any particular piece of research. But as I said before, it's a very interactive process, and the researchers are going to move between working with their colleagues, with sets of data, with critical friends, and with the literature. And there is this interactive process moving between it. It's not always in the sense of like a bricolage, although that's a very powerful method, but is that ability to draw upon a number of different sources which are going to challenge your thinking, challenge practice, and that's what we sort of drew upon when we're thinking about this particular study of what sort of sets of data and what sort of interactions are going to be really powerful for us to understand especially Luis's role within this sustaining this knowledge community.
Thank you, Alan, for enhancing the sense of the interaction in self-study. And again, about our specific piece of research. Well, our self-study as a methodological adventure, we have used previous data, and I must say that about the interactions often raise different feelings, emotions, and assumptions, beliefs, and keeping the dialogue open is a key to navigate such differences between colleagues, between data sets, literature, and with critical friends also. We generated many memory stories, and most of them regarding the data set itself, but we also shared stories of our own. So stories from João, stories from Alan, and those stories, they made us connect in a deeper way, but they are not all regarding the data set. So we used the specific stories about the data set in the research and in the self-study, and specifically about the literature. Our article is about to be published at any minute now, is on press, but one would notice that many pages are about the references. So I think a lot of pages, perhaps 10 pages of the paper, which is a lot. That's because we really shared previous articles that we have read, and we suggested literature for each other, and it took quite a bit of time to read, to appropriate of those readings. So it was really a deep adventure doing this self-study all together. Alan, can you move ahead, please? And about our findings, we came to 4 major thematic arcs as findings. The first one regarding the relational connections. We found that social groupings emerged through their connections and functions within the knowledge community. Then connections formed through friendships and shared values between the teacher researchers, and the connections were facilitated by face-to-face and also online relationships. And one different topics that the leadership has been distributed within the community, and it was not assumed in a near hierarchical manner. So leadership was not was non-hierarchical, which is quite different from a common notion of leadership. And the second major findings are related to the affordances, and the social groupings open up affordances for the members, and the participants of the knowledge community valued the collegiality, support, and affinity to a common mission to research their own practices and address issues of racism and social justice. And it was different from institutional research groups that some members have been engaged in their professional and academic trajectories. And there was a validation of their stance, the stance of being a teacher researcher, even working in basic education and not necessarily in higher education, and also opportunities to publish based on the teacher's practices. Please, Alan. And concluding about the findings, the third major thematic arc is related to the effective forces. And we came to a question, what forces are shaping the relational connections constituting the knowledge community? And through that question, we came to some answers. Well, the group has been formed around a common set of values and politics. And also group activities cultivated feelings of achievement, commitment to one another, and also individually a sense of motivation, but collectively there was a sense of mobilization. So I must say that the sense of collective mobilization is a difference in this group pathway. And a deep sense of recognition, of being both seen and heard by peers in the knowledge community. And finally, the fourth major findings is related to the agential capacities. The question is what agency becomes possible and enacted for group members. And we used metaphors to trying to address that question, and specifically two metaphors, springboard and momentum. And through those metaphors, we found that within the knowledge community, there is an enacting, the knowledge community itself is a space for critique, enacting the voice and activism of its members, and also supported the teacher researchers' careers in teaching and their pathways and professional trajectories. And please, Alan, can you go ahead? And I think now is concerning to João and his ideas after participating in the self-study.
Yeah. Thank you, Luiz. Yeah, so this is, I guess, just I was kind of the newcomer to the process. It was very rewarding, very enriching. From head, I wouldn't be able to remember or to do the maths on how many hours of online meetings we've had, but they were very, very, very rich and very deep. So it was a very good process. So I guess the metaphor to the left in terms of the image with the compass and the map, I guess it tries to reflect that I feel a little bit more my state of readiness to embark on another self-study project is definitely better. I feel a little bit less lost in terms of how to go about the process, and I would just like I kind of connect and bring back to full circle the earlier points at that I started, or as I started. So the first one was after hearing Missy Parker and her emotional account of the self-study journey, I do feel now and relate that emotional side of experiencing self-study. As Luiz said, and as Alan highlighted at the beginning in terms of the characteristics, it's very personal, it's very deep, it's very rich, it's very shared. So all of those connections and all of those opportunities to share definitely bring up an emotional side, and even also some of the stories that we hear, they also allow us to connect with the emotions of each of the participants, each of us essentially. So that emotional side was very, very clear to me, and it's an aspect that I clearly value in terms of the process of the self-study, that I personally, I think I can say that I haven't experienced this kind of emotional element with any other methodology that I've engaged so far, which would be the more, I guess, more traditional, more mainstream, I guess. I do find that my dispositions to engage with self-study have become stronger. I do feel that I had the idea that the self-study was very aligned to my practitioner researcher stance, and now I kind of have a certainty that it is, and I also have a little bit of that experience. So definitely, I feel a reinforcement of those dispositions to keep pursuing self-study as another tool in my toolkit to keep developing my practice and to engage further with research. I also feel that I learned about the benefits of being a critical friend. I guess that having a person such as Alan and Luiz having done the self-study themselves before allowed me to be to learn, like, even though implicitly and invisibly we never discussed my own learning process about it, but I definitely feel that I learned from hearing Alan in terms of his the way that he would frame the questions and the kind of stories that he would bring and so on. That definitely helped me to think about, and seeing the connection between both of them made me a little bit more aware of the value. And I mean, all of that story that they had before, it was recurrent, so it definitely made me learn more about being a critical friend in the process of self-study. I'd say that to some extent I'm kind of still wondering about some of those deeper differences between self-study and those other similar methods, but I do feel that I'm clear on specific aspects. Some of them have been highlighted by Al in terms of the political element. That was, I guess it was very, very close to Luiz's own project. The political dimension was very, very strong, so that clearly was highlighted to me. But also the social and the social constructivist were so prominent, so, I mean, so how do I say, so consistent, so robust throughout all of the process, that I do feel that that is very unique to self-study. In terms of the method, from the research perspective, obviously we had an objective to translate of all of that knowledge, all of those stories to a paper, to a research output. So recording as many and as much interactions as possible was essential for the research process, but definitely as well for the practice, because it allowed us to keep those memories alive and learn about each other, not just during the research process, but also about our own practices. So that recording, that systematic approach, and not leave that at the anecdotal perspective, was fundamental for us. So those would be my reflections at the end of the process, and I now turn it over back to Alan.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, there is one more slide there if anyone views the presentation a little bit later, but let's just, I know we want to pause and maybe answer a few questions or get into a discussion. Hand it back to you, Carla. How would you like to lead it from here?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the presentation. We have some questions on the chat. Risto is burning to ask a question. Let's see if he can release himself.
Oh, thank you so much. I have been waiting to have this conversation because I am personally confused and conflicted with action research and self-study. And when I have presented in the past action research papers and they go through peer review, the comment almost and always comes back and says, this is a self-study, you should position this as a self-study. But in the beginning, we've always positioned it as the cyclical change and action research. We rooted in the action research, and I try to politely explain that it's not. But then I read what you're saying, So if I look at the action research studies that I've been a part of with an undergraduate student during student teaching, and now with Alba, who's on this call as a doctoral student teaching for the first time, it's, you know, self-focused, improvement is the aim, interactive, it has rigorous evidence, it reframes that thinking, but it's not set in that way when we design it. And so can you kind of speak to that? And I know, João, you also talked about that in your very beginning of your kind of question. So I don't know if you can share any information with me on that.
Yeah, what a great question. Thank you. And it's the one that always pops up because, you know, in this broader paradigm, and I think as João sort of talked about, you know, if you're a practitioner researcher, you know, what are we searching for in terms of this overall title for this sort of group of methods or methodologies? So, you know, the practitioner researcher that's involved in understanding their own practice, and there's, you know, there's a number of different tools that we can draw upon to do that. One of the ways of answering this is to sort of look at a little bit of the history of self-study, and many of the early self-study researchers in the 1990s were very much part of the action research community, and you can always track you can track the split between the action research group and the self-study group. As a self-study person, you could kind of look at the action research and say, did it sort of become action research? Did it become sort of moribund in the sense that theoretically it hasn't gone as extended as to the potential that it could? You know, how has it been able to be sustained as a sort of as a movement? Self-study is a little bit more open in that sense because it can draw upon a number of different theoretical ways of framing itself. But I suppose the answer to you in a sense is that an action research project can be a self-study. They're not separate, they're not different, but at the same time an action research project can also not be a self-study if it's not focused on the self, but it's focused on other research questions. If it doesn't kind of fit those broader characteristics, then a piece of action research can be a collaborative exercise to improve practice without necessarily focusing on the researcher's own practice or trying to understand their own self in practice. So they're kind of overlapping in that sense, with that understanding is that they have come from the same sort of foundations.
If I can just to share on my personal perspective, Risto, what I feel in terms of I still have the same kind of question. I mean, I don't have like a clear answer that I can provide. What I can say is that from experiencing both methods, what I would probably say is that action research is more linear and predictable in its approach. Like, you do have a beginning problem, you do rehearse a set of possible solutions, you put those solutions into practice, you collect evidence about those solutions, and you see how they unfold into the new development, be it the product of student learning or be it the product of a new practice. So that's what I mean about being a little bit more predictable, a little bit more linear. You kind of know from the beginning the kind of evidence that you're looking for, you know the outcome that you're looking for. You might not know the full process, but there's a number of things that are, I'd say, are a little bit more well known at the beginning of the action research journey, where self-study, what I found, and it might have been, I only have this one experience from my own, so I might be biased in the sense that I only have this kind of experience, but what I found was it's definitely more complex, that's definitely less linear. I'd say it's very non-linear. We actually have I don't know if this is a good story or a good way to represent, but I remember that one of our struggles as we were trying to put the paper together was actually trying to capture what are the actual pieces of findings and how can we represent those findings. We knew what the story was, but it was so unpredictable. It was very hard for us to put all of the structure of the paper together. And I think that represents the non-linearity of the process, because we knew that we were generating evidence. We knew that we're generating stories. We knew that we were chasing a research question that Luiz presented, but it was never clear the kind of outcome or product that we would end up with. So I don't know if that's a good beginning answer, but that's my experience of how I feel the differences between the two methods so far.
Thank you for that. I'm also wondering, how do you navigate the first person language in your writing? So, you know, research papers that you see a lot, they're like, you know, Risto and Cassandra are researchers at this and this university. They did this and this and this, and you write in a removed space, versus when Alan, you're doing a self-study on yourself. How do you present that data? Like, where do you turn to first person versus, or do you just explain in the paper, I'm going to be using these, you know, pronouns to describe what's happening? Because I found that very confusing as well.
In part, I think that depends on the journal, because often the journal editors will have an opinion whether you use the, you know, your names in that process. Generally, I like to default to saying, you know, using your names, because this is the self-study aspect of it. And then to default to a third person would be around ethical issues, or whether you are, the editor is sort of saying, like, you know, let's throttle back and just not use first names in that sense. The only other time that I may not use a name in there is if the method itself suggests not using somebody's names. So the example there is like collective memory work, where you would deliberately not use your name when you write a memory story, because it allows you to step back from that memory and be more descriptive rather than be part of that story. So I think that's, as I said, my first thing would be to use my name, and then be guided on that afterwards.
Okay, so can I proceed with another question? All right, so Ferman had from Qatar, he had a comment about graduate students, and Donald kind of sent him some resources. Anything Donald wants to say, to ask, or Ferman, do you want to ask something?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, hi everyone. Sorry, my camera isn't working. I just had one question actually about autoethnography, which I dabbled in. I've started to dabble in as well too. So given recent discourse around autoethnography, I had written a performance autoethnography, but I felt I didn't feel sure that that what I had written was I was a little bit concerned about putting it out for review in relation to the ethics of what I was writing about. So what I did was I gave it to, I had a critical friend, and then I wasn't sure about my critical friend didn't have a background in autoethnography, but was still my critical friend at this point in purpose. So I then put it out for another friend of mine for an external audit. And this person would have been, like myself, just very new to auto or to self-study. So I still felt that I needed a professional opinion. So I put it out to another person who was an autoethnography professor. So I'm just wondering, is that overkill, or what role would those people play in that particular instance, considering that I wrote I conducted the study myself, I relied on my critical friend, but I also then asked these people to look at something, because again, my concern about what's ethical and not kind of came up, and it's something, I suppose, which is discourse around self-study at the moment. Thanks.
Can I just clarify that the question is around you sort of said, is it overkill? But is it the role of the critical friend in that process, and the layering of a number of different critical friends, which is the question there?
I think so, yeah. I'm wondering, like, I didn't necessarily draw on the two people that weren't directly involved in the study or on the site or in the study itself. And I'm just wondering, like, where do these people, where are they positioned? Does that make it a collaborative self-study or not? I think the confusion I still have in my head.
I think I remember sitting in a conference once and somebody presented some of their work, and they had a little group who'd worked as their critical friends. And at the end of it, just not embarrassing him, but Murray Phillips, I think from Queensland University, sort of said, so this is what it's become. Is it just the pooling of collective ignorance? And it always stuck in my mind. At what point does collaboration with our peers not contribute to disturbing and interrupting, or even provoking us to reanalyze our assumptions and our beliefs? And so it's always sort of been there for me. So the role of that critical friend is really about being able to make us rethink that data in a way which is not just confirming what we've already previously thought, but maybe bring a fresh set of eyes to it. Now, I know someone like Tim Fletcher and his work with Anne McPhail and his group they talk about having different critical friends at different levels. And that was a case of being able to progressively kind of step away from the project, so that I think Mary O'Sullivan was there, one of those sort of senior critical friends who could ask some really good questions, which meant that she wasn't immersed in that sort of the immediacy of the data and the experiences and what have you, but she could just, so there was that opportunity. And so that sounds similar to what you've done. You sort of, at each step there, you've had somebody else question you, but in the end, because it's that political stance, it is your ability to take on board that, rethink your practice, and then come to that final, I suppose, those outcomes. I don't know if that's a good answer to your question there, but
I think Denise has the comment there, meta-critical friend. So I think we'll leave it at that for me, but thanks very much.
And well, on the same line, Seth Eckler asked about if there are specific guidelines for critical friend when you do a self-study. Or you could have suggestions of literature too.
Yes, it's some really good work around critical friends in the self-study literature. I think the second handbook has got a chapter on critical friends. As I just said, I think Tim Fletcher has worked with some colleagues and written about being a critical friend. So some of the guidelines are there. If Tim was online, he would talk about the need to develop that relationship first. And often when you're starting out on a project, it takes a little while to develop the levels of trust and that's required. And so I suppose that's the two sides of that term, critical friendship. It is about having what friendship implies. It implies a sort of a non-hierarchical relationship which is developed, but also somebody who is invested in supporting and enabling the project to go forwards. And the notion of critique is in there from the point of view of being able to ask and probe and challenge some of the assumptions and the ideas and the interpretations that you're making around that data. So those are kind of broadly some ideas about critical friendship, but also, the literature's out there. I see João wants to add in here something, Joe?
Yeah, with my very modest experience of being a critical friend in this process, I say that probably the two biggest skills, if I can put it like that, that I felt that were needed or were warranted for me as a critical friend were the hearing skill, being very willing to hear and to not just hear but absorb and like take notes and think and think deeply about what was being said. So that was, I guess, my first most important skill. And the second one, Alan mentioned that as well, the questioning, but like questioning like with a sense of friendship, not questioning for the sake of questioning or for critiquing, but questioning sometimes even sharing your own story. So what you're saying makes me think about something that happened with myself, or this makes me think about this own story. And is there any relationship between this or the other? So the hearing and the questioning, including the sharing piece there, I think they're fundamental practical elements of being a critical friend.
Well, thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and then we have a question on the chat. If you, Alan, João, Luiz, you can read. It's Kelly Baker. It's quite long, so if you can help me out reading, I can save some time.
Okay. Is the one about the cultural differences, is that?
It's the one, if a characteristic of self-study is self-initiated, in what ways can it be self-study if a researcher initiates the study with teachers by coming to teachers with something on which to focus their self-study? In other words, as a researcher, I want to support teachers with self-study, but does it lose the characteristic of being self-initiated if it wasn't the teacher who initiated the research, nor the focus? Example, an unfamiliar pedagogical approach.
Sorry.
No, I hope you understood.
Yeah, no. It's a really interesting problem, isn't it? Because you're bringing to that that situation your expertise as an academic who knows the field, who probably can see some issues that need to be addressed. And I suppose the starting point is to recognize the teacher as a fellow expert in their particular context who is also capable of entering into this project. And so I suppose the starting point is to have some conversations around the type of issues and that are prevalent in that particular context. Normally, when I've worked with teachers in the past and you ask them to, you know, what are the problems and questions they have about their practice, they're very good at being able to put on the table the types of issues that are really important for them. And the teachers implicitly understand the sort of the complexity of the situation in which they're working. So I think it's possible to develop a collaboration with teachers where you're exploring the type of issues which are relevant to them in their practice. And I know that's, in one sense, I kind of think it would be really frustrating if I was a teacher, and this kind of happens at the university at times, that somebody comes in and says, here's the solution. This is all you have to do this. And doesn't engage me in the discussion of saying, well, what are some of the issues that you're encountering in your teaching at the moment? And how does your pedagogy emerge as a response to those types of issues and the constraints that you're facing in your situation? So that would be the starting point, to explore some of those things and then move on from possibly there.
Alan, thank you very much. I sent a message accidentally, just one person instead of to everybody. So I would like to say thank you to everyone. We want to be mindful about the time. It's 3 o'clock where I live. So it is time for all of you. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. And thank you again for everybody, for all your work, and for your attendance. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.